The Orion Nexus hung in the void, a shimmering nexus of alien design and purpose, its silvery spires gleaming against the stars. Inside, an expanse of light and energy buzzed with the hum of diplomacy as delegates from dozens of species gathered for the Galactic Peace and Technology Conference. Commander Evelyn Park stepped off the human shuttle, her polished boots striking the station's glassy floor with a deliberate rhythm. She paused, surveying the expanse before her, towering alien figures, iridescent skin, and voices like wind chimes mingled with squat forms cloaked in metallic exosuits. Despite the chaos of the gathering, her gaze remained steady, her military precision a quiet statement of authority. Beside her, Captain Naomi Arkwright adjusted her crisp uniform and leaned slightly closer. "They're staring again," she muttered, her voice edged with amusement. "They always do," Evelyn replied evenly, her tone betraying neither pride nor irritation. "Humans are still the wild card in this galaxy." Naomi smirked, but said nothing, her eyes flitting to a cluster of Lyrians nearby. Their flowing robes shimmered with colors that seemed to shift as they moved, and their serene expressions betrayed no sign of the unease Evelyn often read in alien faces. One Lyrian stepped forward, her hands folded neatly in greeting. "Commander Park," the Lyrian said, her voice soft yet carrying a musical quality that drew attention from several nearby groups. "I am Counselor Lyria Thassel. On behalf of the Lyrian Council, I welcome you to Orion Nexus." Evelyn inclined her head. "Counselor Thassel, the Earth Defense Corps is honored to be here." The pleasantries were exchanged quickly, though Lyria's curious gaze lingered on Evelyn's sidearm, a sleek pistol holstered low on her hip. It wasn't the weapon itself that caught the counselor's attention. Aliens rarely concerned themselves with human designs, but the simple fact that it was ballistic. The presence of a primitive weapon at a summit meant to showcase the galaxy's technological zenith was almost laughable. "Forgive me," Lyria began, her tone measured, "but I must admit, I find your choice of armament intriguing. Surely Earth has access to advanced energy weapons by now." Evelyn met the question without flinching. "We do." Lyria tilted her head, waiting for more. When it became clear Evelyn wouldn't elaborate, the counselor pressed delicately, "And yet you choose to carry that." Naomi's lips twitched into a faint smile. "That," she said, "is a very effective piece of hardware." Lyria's brow furrowed ever so slightly, a ripple in her otherwise placid demeanor. "I suppose effectiveness is relative. Many species abandoned ballistic technology cycles ago. Energy-based systems are cleaner, safer, and far more efficient. Your reliance on projectiles strikes me as anachronistic." Evelyn's eyes sharpened, but her voice remained steady. "Efficiency isn't the only measure of a weapon's worth, Counselor." Before Lyria could respond, a low chime reverberated through the chamber, signaling the start of the day's demonstrations. Delegates began moving toward the central amphitheater, where holographic displays projected detailed schematics of various innovations. Lyria hesitated before motioning for Evelyn and Naomi to follow. The amphitheater was a marvel of alien architecture, its domed ceiling awash in shifting constellations that seemed to stretch into infinity. Evelyn and Naomi took their seats near the front, their presence drawing more curious glances. A presenter, a sinewy figure with emerald skin and elongated limbs, began detailing a new energy shield capable of neutralizing any form of plasma-based assault. The crowd murmured appreciatively, though Evelyn remained impassive, her fingers steepled beneath her chin. When it was humanity's turn, Naomi stepped forward, a calm confidence in her stride. The human delegation had decided to forego the usual theoretical presentations, opting instead for a practical demonstration. A hologram flickered to life, showing a rugged ballistic rifle suspended in midair. "This," Naomi began, her voice cutting through the low hum of alien whispers, "is the M99 Reaper, a projectile weapon designed for versatility and reliability. It fires tungsten carbide rounds capable of piercing most modern armor." The murmurs grew louder, many of them laced with disbelief. Lyria's expression turned from polite curiosity to something bordering on alarm. Naomi continued undeterred. "Unlike energy weapons, which can be disrupted by electromagnetic interference or depleted power sources. Ballistic weapons operate on simple, time-tested principles. They're not dependent on the environment, nor are they subject to the same vulnerabilities as more sophisticated systems. A delegate from a crystalline species rose, his voice sharp. And what of the collateral damage? The inefficiency of such violence? Naomi met his gaze unflinchingly. Collateral damage is not unique to ballistics. War itself is inefficient. Our weapons are designed to ensure survival, not to cater to aesthetics. Lyria leaned closer to Evelyn, her voice low. You've chosen to cling to chaos when the galaxy offers precision. Why? Evelyn finally turned to her, her expression unreadable. Sometimes chaos is the only answer, Counselor. And sometimes chaos is what keeps the enemy at bay. The words hung between them, unanswered, as the demonstration concluded. The crowd's reaction was a mix of skepticism and unease, though Evelyn noted a few nods of reluctant respect. As the delegates began to disperse, Lyria lingered, her gaze fixed on the hologram of the rifle. I hope, she said quietly, that the galaxy never learns to see the wisdom in such tools. Evelyn's response was quiet but firm. For your sake, Counselor, I hope it never has to. As they departed the amphitheater, the atmosphere between the human delegation and their alien counterparts had shifted. Suspicion had deepened, curiosity sharpened, and the unspoken question of humanity's true nature loomed larger than ever. The private chamber hummed with artificial stillness, the walls alive with faint pulses of light, as if the station itself were breathing. Evelyn Park stood at the edge of the circular room, her eyes steady as she regarded the gathered delegates. Captain Naomi Arkwright sat to her right, fingers lightly drumming on the table, her posture deceptively relaxed. Across from them, Counselor Lyria Thassel rested her slender hands on the surface, her expression composed but thoughtful. Around them, a few aides and minor officials watched in silence, their eyes shifting between the human representatives and the Lyrian leader as if anticipating a revelation. Lyria broke the quiet first, her voice soft but unyielding. Commander Park, I must admit I've struggled to understand what I witnessed today. Your presentation, your defense of projectile weapons, it felt less like a showcase of innovation and more like a relic of a violent past. I had hoped we were beyond such primitive solutions. Evelyn met her gaze without hesitation. It's not about clinging to the past, Counselor. It's about knowing what works when everything else fails. Lyria arched a delicate brow. Failures are the result of flawed designs. The galaxy's most advanced systems are engineered to prevent failure, not accommodate it. Surely Earth's ingenuity can rise beyond kinetic warfare. Naomi leaned forward slightly, her lips curving into a faint, knowing smile. With respect, Counselor, perfection is a myth. No system is infallible. Power grids collapse. Energy disruptors render even the best shields useless. What you call progress, we call vulnerability. Lyria sighed, her serene composure rippling with faint frustration. You speak as though chaos is inevitable. It often is, Evelyn said quietly. Especially in war. The Counselor's eyes softened, though her voice remained firm. But war is a failure of diplomacy. It should be avoided through understanding, not prepared for with brutality. For a moment, the room felt smaller, the air heavier. Evelyn's jaw tightened, her mind conjuring memories she would rather forget. Conflicts fought in the dark reaches of space where the clean, elegant lines of diplomacy had been shattered by the blunt force of reality. We do not prepare for war because we seek it, Evelyn said, her voice low but carrying the weight of conviction. We prepare because others will not hesitate to use any means necessary to destroy us. Energy weapons, quantum disruptors, plasma arrays, they all have their place. But there's a reason we still rely on ballistics. She gestured toward the sidearm holstered at her hip. This isn't just a weapon. It's a reminder of resilience. When shields fall and power fails, this will fire. Every time. Lyria's expression remained neutral, but a flicker of something, doubt perhaps, passed through her eyes. Reliability is admirable, but does it justify the destruction? the fear your weapons evoke. Ballistics are brutal, inelegant. They tear, shatter, and destroy in ways that defy precision. Naomi's fingers stilled. Fear is a weapon, too. The counselor blinked, taken aback. You embrace fear. Fear, Naomi said evenly, is often the only thing that keeps the enemy from advancing. It's not clean, it's not elegant, but it works. She paused, her gaze steady. There was a time when we faced an enemy with technology far superior to ours. Their energy shields could absorb plasma fire. Their disruptors could scramble targeting systems. They laughed at the idea of solid projectiles, until we introduced them to tungsten rounds moving at hypersonic speeds. Their shields didn't react in time. Their ships cracked open like glass. The silence that followed was palpable. Lyria inhaled slowly, the weight of the tale settling on her shoulders. You used fear to survive. Yes, Evelyn said. And survival isn't always pretty. The counselor leaned back, her eyes thoughtful. I understand the logic, but I still wonder if it comes at too high a cost. Fear breeds hatred. Brutality fosters more brutality. Where does it end? Evelyn's voice was calm, but unshakably firm. It ends when those who would destroy us realize they'll face consequences too terrible to bear. The room grew quiet again, but the air between them had shifted. Lyria no longer looked at the humans as curiosities or relics of a barbaric age. She regarded them as something far more dangerous, pragmatists who understood the cost of peace as well as the necessity of war. She stood, her movements graceful, deliberate. I appreciate your candor, Commander. It seems there is far more to Earth's philosophy than I understood. There always is, Evelyn said. Lyria paused at the door, her gaze lingering. I hope we never live in a galaxy where your lessons become universal. As the door closed behind her, Naomi exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. Diplomats. She shook her head, a wry grin tugging at her lips. They never want to believe it until it's too late. Evelyn glanced at her, the corner of her mouth twitching into a rare, fleeting smile. She'll believe it soon enough. In the distance, a faint vibration thrummed through the station, almost imperceptible but unmistakable to those who had lived through countless battles. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. She didn't need an alarm to know what was coming. Prepare the ballistics, she said. The vibration beneath their feet was a subtle but ominous tremor, the kind that spoke of distant violence moving closer. Evelyn Park rose from her seat, her posture rigid with alertness, as she exchanged a glance with Naomi Arkwright. Without a word, they moved in unison, their hands instinctively checking their weapons. In the sterile quiet of the chamber, the sound of their preparation fell louder than it should have. The door hissed open, and a junior aide rushed in, his eyes wide with barely contained panic. Commander, there's been a breach. A rogue faction, unknown signature, has compromised the outer defenses. They're using energy disruptors. All primary systems are down. Evelyn's gaze sharpened. How many attackers? 3 ships, the aide replied, his voice trembling. They've disabled the station's shields, and... Enough, she cut in, her voice calm, steady, the center of a gathering storm. Tell the security teams to fall back to defensive positions. We'll hold them here. Naomi was already moving toward the viewport, her eyes scanning the dark expanse beyond. Flickers of distant light marked where the rogue ships unleashed concentrated blasts of energy into the station's crippled hull. No elegant duels or precision strikes. This was an ambush, a blunt force assault designed to tear down defenses and sow chaos. They're counting on us being defenseless, Naomi murmured, a grim satisfaction settling in her voice. Big mistake. Across the room, the air shifted as Counselor Lyria Thassel stepped forward, her normally serene features tight with tension. What do they want? She asked, her voice thin, as if struggling to hold its composure. Evelyn didn't look at her. It doesn't matter what they want. What matters is that they think we can't fight back. Lyria clasped her hands together, her knuckles pale. Surely the station's energy weapons. Disabled, Naomi interrupted. Your disruptor-based defenses are useless. They've taken out everything that depends on centralized power. She patted the sidearm at her hip. But this doesn't need a grid. It needs a steady hand and a clear shot. The counselor swallowed, her gaze flicking to the ballistic weapons the humans carried. You mean to fight them? With those? Yes, Evelyn said simply. A tremor ran through the floor as another blast shook the station. Overhead, the lights flickered and dimmed. For a brief, terrible moment, the room plunged into darkness before the emergency power hummed to life. Shadows danced against the walls, and the metallic tang of fear hung heavy in the air. Commander, Naomi said, her voice urgent, we have to move. They'll breach the lower decks soon. If they take engineering, they won't. Evelyn turned to Lyria. Stay here. Lock the doors behind us. The counselor's eyes widened. You're going to confront them directly? Yes, Evelyn replied. And we'll stop them. Naomi grinned, a sharp edge of adrenaline lighting her features. The old-fashioned way. In the narrow corridors of Orion Nexus, the fight unfolded in brutal, visceral clarity. The rogue faction soldiers, tall and sinewy with armored exoskeletons, moved with practiced precision, their energy rifles firing bolts of searing plasma that left scorched craters in the walls. Against them, the humans fought with kinetic force, solid rounds that tore through armor and flesh alike. Evelyn's rifle barked in controlled bursts, each shot deliberate, each target falling with a finality that energy weapons could never replicate. The air was thick with smoke and the acrid stench of gunpowder, a contrast to the sterile efficiency of plasma. Naomi moved like a dancer, fluid and lethal, her pistol spitting rounds into the gaps between enemy armor. The projectiles found purchase where no energy beam could, ripping through weak points designed to resist entirely different physics. She smiled grimly as one of the attackers collapsed, their shielded exosuit no match for tungsten. Behind them, Lyria watched through a narrow viewport, her heart thundering in her chest. She had seen violence before, on distant screens, in reports filled with euphemisms and statistics, but this was different. This was raw, unfiltered brutality. The flash of muzzle fire, the spray of metal, the dull, final thud of bodies hitting the floor. Her fingers trembled. It's horrifying. The aide beside her nodded mutely, his eyes wide with terror. Yet Evelyn and Naomi moved without hesitation, their actions precise, their weapons extensions of their will. They did not hesitate. They did not falter. They advanced. The battle reached its crescendo as the last of the rogue soldiers fell, their defeat marked not by the sterile hum of a deactivated system, but by the grim silence that followed the final shot. Smoke hung heavy in the air, and the acrid scent of spent ammunition lingered like a ghost of violence past. Evelyn lowered her rifle, her breathing steady. She glanced at Naomi, who offered a brief, satisfied nod. Status? Evelyn asked. All clear, Naomi replied. Engineering is secure. No more hostiles. They moved back through the corridors, their steps echoing in the heavy stillness. When they re-entered the chamber, Lyria stood waiting, her expression unreadable. You stop them, she whispered. Evelyn nodded. Yes. The counselor's eyes flicked to the weapons in their hands. With those? Yes, Evelyn said again. A long silence stretched between them. Lyria's gaze, usually calm and detached, now burned with something new. Understanding, perhaps, or a reluctant respect born of fear. I see now, she said softly, why you keep them, why you believe in them. It's not about belief, Evelyn replied. It's about survival. Naomi stepped forward, her smile devoid of humor. War isn't elegant, counselor. It's brutal. And sometimes the only way to win is to fight with what works. As the station's systems flickered back to life, Lyria turned away, her eyes distant. The weight of her new knowledge pressed down upon her, heavy as the silence after the last gunshot.